All right. Welcome to Standing for Truth. And I am excited for this specific video because, as you can tell from the title, the new special creation, updated and expanded book is available. Dismantling Evolution and Confirming Independent Origins. So you'll find it in the description box. Again, my brother Benjamin did a fantastic job on the cover, and of course the back right there. Tons of topics discussed very thoroughly in this book, Mitochondrial Eve, Why Chromosome Noah. I cover all the so-called best lines of evidence for evolution: chromosome 2 fusion, endogenous retroviruses, transitional forms, nested hierarchies, of course, homology, very extensive chapter on out of Africa versus out of Middle East. As you can tell, it's a big book. It's nearly 300 pages. And what I am doing, same thing that I did with the Endogenous Retrovirus Handbook. Firstly, I'll point out, if you have these two books in your library, okay, you are set when it comes to ancestry in terms of all of the critics' best arguments. They are dealt with thoroughly in these books. I do have a chapter in this book on junk DNA and endogenous retroviruses, but since it's such a deep technical topic, and as we know, the evolutionists advance or put forth endogenous retroviruses as, you know, the so-called best line of evidence for evolution. And so I wrote an entire 200-page book on it. So this one, again, highly recommend. It's a must-have, must-read. This one's pretty well 3 years in the making, but you're going to find some really novel answers in this book, especially when it comes to Neanderthal phylogenetics. All of your best objections and arguments against the reality of genetic entropy are dealt with in this book. For example, chapter 4, genetic degeneration, evidence for independent origins or separate ancestry. It could be made into its own handbook that also goes for the chapter on Neanderthal. So what I would like everybody to do, if they can, check the either description box or the comment section, because I do have both the black and white and the full color editions of this book there for everybody. And what I like to do, and as I was pointing out earlier, when it comes to the ERV handbook, is I'll buy them in bulk, and they are really good to pass around to friends, family, you know, in church, because they are thorough and cover so many important topics. I mean, I've been engaging and debating these evolutionists now almost nonstop for the last 5 years. And I've had roughly 100 formal debates, many of these debates with PhD scientists, serious students of evolution. And I have been I've been confronted with all of their favorite talking points, their best, most challenging arguments. And in these two books specifically, they are dealt with. But again, this one is close to 300 pages. And so I have it priced at cost. So since we get them published and printed and sent out through Amazon, in order for myself to buy them in bulk as well at a fair price, we set it at cost, pretty much printing cost. And so I am going to keep it that way for a little bit, because I think it's important to get the truth out there. And, you know, it's worth it, because what we do here at Standing for Truth Ministries is we focus on defending the truth of biblical creation. So again, it's worth it. It's 300 pages, touches on all sorts of topics related to the ancestry issue. So, for those, as I know a lot of people wanted to do with the ERV handbook, for the first week or two, the ERV handbook was the #1 bestseller in terms of new books. And let's try and do that for the special creation book as well. So, yeah, I'm pumped. I'm pumped, especially because I love the cover. I love the way Benjamin designed it and how it looks in person, the physical copy. So, should be listed in the description box, and I'll pin it in the comment section for those who are interested in the new special creation book. And with that being said, I want to share screen and cover a few other things, because as you can tell from the title, I want to cover some topics that are covered in the book itself, and also just thank everybody for making the Defending Genesis Conference 2022 really just a blast. That week flew by. We had 5 events, or 5 days, 2 videos, 2 shows per day for about 10 shows. We ended it with a debate on Friday. So we wrapped up the entire conference with a very entertaining debate between Kent Hovind and David Emery. So roughly 20 hours of content in this conference. It flew by. 5 days, 10 shows. Just real quick recap. We had about 9 or 10 speakers overall. So we started off the week, the relevance of Genesis, Sal Jardina. Same day, we had T-Rock, isochron method, other dating duds. The next day, we had, which was day 2, Genesis genetics with Matt N. And CJ Cox just destroyed compromise, countered compromise. Okay, so not only were there evolutionist tears, if you can see my mug here, best way to start the day is a nice, fresh, hot cup of evolutionist tears. Theistic evolutionist tears as well. The uninspiring compromiser, the arguments he puts forth in parrots from people like Heiser and Walter, not very challenging. And CJ Cox demonstrated that sufficiently, just absolutely wrecked arguments from compromising positions. This one was a ton of fun. This one was awesome. Joe and John Mackay, the creation guy, never disappoint. So we talked about dinosaurs in the Bible and the G illogic column. So the flume experiments that they went over with these rapidly forming layers, and just absolutely dismantling the G illogic column. Glad to see this got a lot of good feedback. Just 2 hours of nonstop information debunking all of the evolutionists' favorite arguments, talking points. Myself, of course, gave that. Day 4 was heavy on content with Dr. Jerry Bergman and Professor David McQueen and George Bond, amazing evidence for the worldwide flood, Darwin's frauds, blunders, and forgeries. And of course, day 5, evidence for creation, Matt Powell. And then we wrapped it up with an epic debate. So I do have all of them listed in a playlist for people to check out as well. And eventually I will have them uploaded on the website and hopefully on the podcast. So, okay. With that being said, I think I'm just going to, tonight or this video, it's not going to be an incredibly long video. I just want to again let people know to please, check the description box. I'll pin it in the comment section. This is a book you're not going to want to miss out on, and it's an amazing deal right now. It's as cheap as it can get. It's at printing cost, which means just like those with the Endogenous Retrovirus Handbook, those that wanted to buy in bulk, feel free to do so. This is going to be the best time to do so. The full color edition really is beautiful. There are some nice pictures in this book. And so the full color edition looks good as well. We are working on getting a hardcover for everybody too, because it's a great time to be a creationist, and you're going to find papers from 2022 in here just demonstrating just why it's a great time to be a biblical creationist. So I'm going to stop sharing just to make sure that I've got the audio checked. And what I want to do is play a short section from good old PAULOGIA, going over the typical talking points when it comes to the chromosome 2 fusion. I understand PAULOGIA, low-hanging fruit. What I mean by low-hanging fruit is PAULOGIA has never done a formal debate on evolution in his life. He puts out obviously these scripted videos, and PAULOGIA knows, I know, we all know that if he were to engage an informed creationist in a formal debate on these topics, I mean, I wrote a 200-page book on endogenous retroviruses. His arguments presented in this video on ERVs almost not even worth addressing. I mean, it's like taking candy from a baby, okay? And I mean that in Christian love, of course. I'd gladly debate him on ERV. I've debated conspiracy cats on it. Luca Medugno just recently, he's a chemistry teacher over in Italy. He read my book. We set up the debate a few months ago, and we had a fantastic, very technical, engaging debate on the topic. I've debated Snake Was Right, who's a cell biology student. On this, I've engaged all of Dr. Dan Stern-Cardinal, PhD virologist, all of his arguments in this book and in videos, of course. So, the argument from ERVs, shared ERV sequences, they are not good evidence for why PAULOGIA believes whales and pine trees are related. And if he wants to debate, I'll gladly do it, because, I've debated and we have on those who may not be as popular as PAULOGIA, but we have them on the channel for debates, frequent debates. I mean, the Evolution Debate Challenge series in 2022, we've already done roughly 40 of them. And many of them with some serious students of evolution. We had a PhD evolutionary biologist a couple of weeks ago, Dr. Jay Bundy. And so, the point is, somebody like PAULOGIA, Vice Rhino, these guys, they understand that if they're in a live debate with an uninformed creationist, they'll be refuted, and it just won't look good for them. It won't be good for them in terms of their audience, right? Because they've got a lot of posturing, unfortunately, that they need to focus on. And but what I want to do is play his section here on chromosome 2 fusion. I've had full debates on chromosome 2 fusion, and I spend a great deal of time in special creation on the chromosome 2 fusion as well. And it's another one of those easy arguments to dismantle, but still commonly repeated. Because, when you Google best lines of evidence or best arguments for evolution, what pops up? Chromosome 2 fusion, ERVs, pseudogenes, nested hierarchies. So, if I had a nickel for every time I had to deal with one of these arguments, I'd be a billionaire. I'd be a very wealthy man. So, okay. Again, since I'm not doing this live, I'm just going to unshare, share system audio. I'm going to mute, and we are going to make sure that we get through his whole section here on it. Here we go.
Is predicting future data. The better a model makes predictions of findings, the better it is. Be it the timing of the next eclipse, the existence of the Higgs boson particle, or genetic markers that make sense only if all life emerged from common ancestry. One such prediction is the fusion of human chromosome 2. This one was so definitive for me that I named my pre-PAULOGIA blog Chromosome 2. In a live debate, I'd obviously go over this myself, but since this is a video, let me throw to the Nova documentary on the Kitzmiller versus Dover trial, the legal case where intelligent design was ruled to not be science.
The cells of all great apes, like chimpanzees, gorillas, and orangutans, contain 24 pairs of chromosomes. If humans share a common ancestor with apes, you'd expect us to have the same number. But surprisingly,
I'm just going to pause it there for 1 second because I do want to go through the whole thing. But what he said there, just in case I forget, I want to point out the fact that, he's saying in a debate, he would be putting forth his own arguments rather than playing a video here. And also that, you know, the chromosome 2 fusion apparently just did it for him, right? That was just the final straw. That was the fatal blow, apparently, against separate ancestry. And it's why he now believes that, you know, he and a strawberry are related through common ancestry. And it's safe to say that PAULOGIA has never once actually defended the chromosome 2 fusion in a live debate. Okay, I'll gladly do it. PAULOGIA. So if you want to debate the chromosome 2 fusion, let's do it. Okay, because again, it's not a strong argument. I see posturing here. He's never once debated that topic with an informed creationist. So I just want to point that out, and I want to point out the fact that a lot of these guys, you know, they'll say it was things like ERVs, it was things like the fusion, it was things like, you know, nested hierarchies, pseudogenes. What I mean, it shows that they're out of date on the technical literature. Okay. They're advancing these arguments that have been just thoroughly dismantled. And it really just goes to show you that, you know, these so-called, you know, converts to atheism really haven't looked into the best evidence for separate ancestry and against universal common ancestry very thoroughly. Probably not at all, really. And again, that's why I have to recommend nearly 300 pages going over the amazing evidence for separate ancestry, literally the best evidence for Adam and Eve. Okay, the historical Adam and Eve is in our genetics. And I may even touch a little bit on that in this video, but I do want to cover the chromosome 2 fusion and also Neanderthals a little bit too. So, okay, here we go. Let's continue.
Human cells contain only 23 pairs.
Evolution makes a testable prediction, and that is that somewhere in the human genome, we ought to be able to find a piece of Scotch tape holding 2 chromosomes together, so that our 24 pairs, 2 of them were pasted together to form just 23. And if we can't find that, then a hypothesis of common ancestry is wrong and evolution is mistaken.
Typically, on the ends of every chromosome, you should find special genetic markers, or sequences of DNA, called telomeres. And in their middles, you should find different genetic markers called centromeres. But if a mutation occurred in the past, causing 2 pairs of chromosomes to fuse, we should find evidence in those genetic markers. Telomeres not only at the ends of the new chromosome, but also at their middles, and not 1, but 2 centromeres.
Lo and behold, the answer is in chromosome number 2. All of the marks of the fusion of those chromosomes predicted by common descent and evolution, all those marks are present on human chromosome number 2. So the case is closed in a most beautiful way. Evolution has made a testable prediction, and it has passed.
Once again, on the few occasions where Kent has even attempted to address human chromosome 2, he has missed the point entirely.
Help me whack an atheist. Chromosome 2 is really just a fusion of 2 grade 8 chromosomes. Why would you think that? It may be similar to the grade 8 chromosomes because the same designer wrote that code. Microsoft Word and Microsoft PowerPoint share the same spell check dictionary. Probably 1,000,000 lines of code identical. Does not prove it evolved from explosion in a print shop. Still, it was designed. So similarity in our code or the apes code is because same guy wrote the code.
This line of evidence isn't saying that humans and chimps are related because their DNA is similar. It's saying that we're related because where we are similar, there is a copying and pasting artifact. Again, for the sake of this debate, we aren't trying to determine if there is a designer, but whether the designer created each kind from scratch, or if the designer built different organisms from common ancestors. If the designer designed humans from scratch, why would the designer add in extra centromeres and telomeres into the chromosome 2 to make it look like gene fusion, when we would expect that perfect designer to instead implement a clean, from-scratch copy of his design?
How do you reconcile the chromosome 2 fusion in humans?
He's saying there are similarities. We're getting rough on a different topic, but there are similarities in the chromosomes of humans and chimps, he thinks. Actually, people don't, you got to really study that. Okay, I could put documents and say, look at the similar documents. These 2 documents both use the same 26 letters of the English alphabet. Aha, that proves they're related.
Again, Kent misses the whole point. For the sake of this debate, I'm agreeing that there's a common designer. We're not examining the similarities or differences of chimps here. We're asking why the designer would use a clean copy of the code for chimps and an obviously mangled copy of the code for humans. It's the centromeres and telomeres that need to be explained in Kent's fixed kinds view. He took one last crack at this because Kent loves to default to complexity.
God made human chromosome number 2 to let us know evolution did happen. If you have to think of it in those terms. I don't have to think of it in those terms. And I don't intend to think of it in those terms.
That is why you fail.
Human chromosome number 2 is incredibly complex. Any one chromosome in any cell is more complex than the space shuttle, the most complex machine built by man, as far as I'm aware. Okay, one chromosome is more complicated than the space shuttle, and if you think that is proof that God made it happen by chance, you need serious help.
Again, Kent, no one discussing human chromosome 2 is denying that it is complex. Just the opposite. We're saying that it seems to be needlessly complex. The designer mashed 2 existing chromosomes together rather than designing a single chromosome. The best answer for this is that the designer utilized common descent. Finding Tiktaalik. As you'll recall, what science values most is unique predictions about future data. And in that light, one has to be impressed with the discovery of Tiktaalik, what common descent affirmers would.
All right, so let's stop it there, and let's address these arguments in great detail. So the first thing I want to point out, though, when it comes to his criticisms of Kent, is that we've been having a 2022 evolution debate challenge series. He knows perfectly well that we're having this challenge. Overall, we've already hosted over 220 debates on all sorts of topics. Okay. No excuses from PAULOGIA, but that's all we get, unfortunately. There's no reason to have excuses, I should say. We've had just about 40 this year on evolution alone, and Kent would love to debate PAULOGIA. So PAULOGIA, bring it on. Either Kent, myself, any number of the debaters involved in the debate challenge series from specifically our team Creationists. And Kent recently had a debate, I think it was Jackson Rowe, where they discussed the chromosome 2 fusion. And Kent put forth several of the challenges that I'm going to put forth. And we'll see if PAULOGIA can address these. And it's funny because he's saying, the chromosome 2 fusion looks like it's been mashed together. Well, I'm here to tell you that you don't get highly functional and essential genes by slamming together 2 chromosomes, okay? And the so-called fusion site that he's looking to actually represents an active promoter, okay, inside a highly functional and essential gene called the DDX11L2 gene. That's why I say you don't get highly functional genes by slamming together 2 chromosomes. And guess what, PAULOGIA? It turns out that these internal telomeric sequences, okay, not even going over the fact that so-called fusion site is highly degenerate. Okay, there should be thousands of these sequences, and we find less than 1,000. But nonetheless, they're still going to point to these sequences, these telomeric-like sequences. Well, guess what? They're found all over the genome, okay, all over the human genome, in all chromosomes, and they have nothing to do with fusion events. And many of these sites turn out that they are performing functional roles. They are functional DNA elements. Just like so many of the other so-called evolutionary leftovers, viral fossils, okay, genomic mistakes, right? Like pseudogenes, they actually represent functional DNA elements like the ERV sequences. And they use the same argument. Oh, well, why did God make it look like it's evolution when it comes to endogenous retroviruses? Why did he make them look like exogenous retroviruses, right? Because they got the LTRs, the long terminal repeats, the GAG, the POL, the ENV components of the ERV, not even realizing that we have paper after paper. And I'm not going to go over it here for sake of time, but I've done hours and hours and hours worth of presentation going over all of the technical papers. As a matter of fact, this entire book has dozens and dozens of papers backing up the fact that ERVs are involved in determining cell types in the embryo. There's papers that literally say if we did not have endogenous retroviruses, we would not exist. I like to exist. Hopefully, PAULOGIA likes to exist. But if you didn't have endogenous retroviruses that you also shared with other forms of life like the chimpanzee, then you wouldn't exist. Okay? Because they represent functional units of DNA. That's why I always say, what's the question when it comes to endogenous retroviruses? Are they really the ancient remnants of past viral infections, or are they created units of DNA function? And the reason why they have similarities to exogenous retroviruses is because one of their many important functional roles is to fight off exogenous retroviruses. Okay, they are also involved in what's called tumor suppression, and they carry out this role because of viral mimicry, which means they have to have similarities to exogenous retroviruses like the LTRs, the GAG, the POL, the ENV genes, okay, in order to carry out their roles. Okay, so here's my challenge to PAULOGIA. A challenge I guarantee he won't meet when it comes to ERVs, and then we'll get back to the chromosome 2 fusion. Okay, show me one example. Give me any technical paper of a non-functional endogenous retrovirus going from non-functional to functional, or an exogenous retrovirus infecting, like HIV, infecting in the right way. And what I mean by that, infecting the germ cell line in order that it can be passed down. Okay. And then that opportunity is there for it through mutations to basically lose the infectious part of it. Okay. And then it can gain a function. And it can become fixed. Fixed just means to be stuck in place. Fixed. Every single person has it, okay? Because guess what? These shared endogenous retroviral-like elements are fixed. And that's why the pre-existing fixed ones actually act, and they're solid of date on the technical literature, act as antiviral protectors. And that's why the unfixed ones, okay, like we see this in the koala, in the koalas right now, the pre-existing ERVs are disrupting the endogenous retroviruses that are newly added based on exogenous retroviral infection in the germ cell line to prevent them from doing any harm. Okay, so show me an example of an exogenous retrovirus infecting in the right way. Okay, and then through a series of mutations, do this in the lab. I don't care how you do it. This is the challenge. Show us either altering its function or gaining a function in, let's say, the embryo, where the host requires this element to even survive in the first place. Okay, so no, when they say things like, why did God make it look like evolution? No, he did not make it look like evolution. The evolutionists are force-fitting the data to make it look like evolution. But again, you don't get highly functional genes by slamming together two chromosomes. Okay, that is a fact. It doesn't look like evolution. It looks like creation. It looks like design. And these so-called internal telomeric sequences, again, they are found all throughout the genome performing functional roles. For example, they are binding, PAULOGIA doesn't know about this, I guarantee, they're binding to what's called transcription factors, which cause or initiate a gene to begin to be copied into RNA. Okay, these are functional DNA elements found all throughout the human genome. In human chromosomes, they have nothing to do with the chromosome 2 fusion. And the so-called fusion sites overlapped by a highly functional gene. Okay, so I want to go over this now. Humans have 46 chromosomes while apes have 48. So again, this was them force-fitting the data. Okay, it's retrofitting because what happened? Well, there's a discrepancy. They find out humans have 46 and then the apes, the great apes, have 48. To the evolutionists, to the evolutionary taxonomists, they want to say we're human apes, and then a chimpanzee would be a non-human ape. Okay, but besides that, since I know the evolutionists like to complain about that, nonetheless, we have plenty of evidence demonstrating that we are not related to the chimpanzees and are therefore not an ape. And I covered this in my latest presentation, going over why chromosomal dissimilarity, massive differences in gene expression, alternative splicing, genome architecture, okay, mitochondrial DNA. I mean, it's not looking good for the evolutionists. And I don't expect PAULOGIA to start answering challenges that PhD evolutionary biologists like Dr. Dan Stern-Cardy, now Dodgeball Dan, that is, can't even answer. Okay, so they retrofitted the data. There's a discrepancy. Humans have 46. Great apes have 48. So they said, oh, well, there must have been a chromosome 2 fusion. And so they're scouring the genome, looking for any kind of anomaly, any kind of discrepancy, any kind of mashing together, as you hear PAULOGIA saying. Okay. And so where do they go to? The chromosome 2. So evolutionists claim this discrepancy can be explained by the end-to-end fusion of two small chromosomes called 2A and 2B in an ape-like ancestor humans shared with chimpanzees. Because they believe chimpanzees are our closest cousin, and we go back to a common ancestor 6 to 10 million years ago. And that common ancestor would have 48 chromosomes, okay? And there would have been a split, and somewhere in the human line. So notice this. It's not even, if there was a fusion event, it happened directly in the human line. So worst case scenario, there is a fusion. Well, guess what? How is that fixated in every single human being according to the evolutionary model? According to the creationist model, we have a bottleneck, two bottlenecks essentially, at the flood with 8 people, and then at the Tower of Babel with between 1,000 and 10,000. So even if there was a fusion line directly in the human line, we can explain how it becomes fixated, stuck in place in every single human being. The evolutionists can't. They got to invoke stories. Okay, and I've looked in all their technical papers. It's all stories. Okay, so here we go. 2A and 2B in an ape-like ancestor humans shared with chimpanzees. It's also claimed that a fusion-like signature of this event, along with an extra fossil centromere, is present on human chromosome 2 as proof. However, both the alleged fusion and centromere sites fail the test when analyzed closely. So this is a failed prediction. You know, he's trying to say testable predictions, right? I'll touch on that in a little bit as well. Even though in genomics, right, genetics being the best way to determine ancestry, and that's why I focus so heavily on genetics in my book, Special Creation here. Reminder, click the description box or the comment section. You're not going to regret it. 300 pages, and it's at cost right now. It doesn't get any better than that. You know, please help us out here at Standing for Truth Ministries. Get another, bestseller like we did with Endogenous Retrovirus Handbook, because it's about getting the truth out there to as many people as we can. So again, Genes, traits, and genetics. That's what's inherited in sperm and egg. Not a rock, not a bone, not a fossil, not geography, no, genes and traits. And that's why when we look to the Y chromosome, that's why when we look to the mitochondrial DNA, that's why when we look to DNA function, we find evidence for separate ancestry and not universal common ancestry, because these evolutionists want to so frequently focus on what's called agnostic or non-discriminatory lines of evidence. Okay, it's like they're saying the sky is blue, the earth is round, therefore evolution is true, and I'm related to a strawberry. It's like, no, creation can also explain why the sky is blue. Creation can also explain why there are homologous features, shared features in the biological world. The creation model can also explain why humans and chimpanzees share more in terms of morphology, anatomy, physiology, and genetics than a human and a dog or a fish. Okay, this is just basic. But it's in the world of genetics where we find what's called discriminatory lines of evidence. And Dr. Ken Miller literally said, if there was no fusion, there was no evolution. Well, I'm here to tell you, this is a failed prediction because there was no fusion, since the so-called fusion site that PAULOGIA didn't even describe. He just played a video and then said in a debate, I would, make the argument. Well, let's go. Let's debate. There's an evolution debate challenge series, and he's going to make excuses why he won't debate Kent. But you know what? We have other informed creationists that he can debate then. Okay. There's no excuse. Chromosome 2 fusion is a weak argument, and the so-called fusion site is overlapped by a highly functional gene. Okay. However, both the alleged fusion and centromere sites failed the test when analyzed closely. Not only are these alleged evolutionary signatures very small in size, right? I pointed that out earlier, how they're very degenerate, okay, and muddled, but both of them are found inside functional genes. So even the so-called second centromere is overlapped by a functional gene. I mean, it doesn't get any better than that for the creationists. The alleged fusion site functions as a genetic switch called a promoter, right? What did I say earlier? It represents an active promoter inside a highly functional gene, the DDX11L2 gene. I'm going to make this full screen for you guys. The alleged fusion site functions as a genetic switch called a promoter inside a long non-coding RNA gene. And the so-called fossil centromere contains both coding and non-coding sequence inside a large protein coding gene. Combined together, these data destroy PAULOGIA's arguments here, basically, the evolutionary hypothesis of fusion. Okay, let me point out the fusion site is actually read in what's called the reverse complement. And it is a transcription factor binding site, because these guys that I've debated, Conspiracy Cat said the same thing, there's not much function going on. It's low level, not understanding that low level transcription is not an argument for, what these evolutionists want to hold on to, the junk DNA paradigm, evolutionary leftovers, which I've dealt with thoroughly in my latest debate with Luca Medugno, but again in my books here. Okay, because what they want to say is the majority of this activity in the genome, since we have evidence for 80% genome activity, they want to say, well, it's mostly noise. Low level transcription indicates noise. It's spurious. But wait a minute. There should be evolutionary mechanisms to suppress all of this noise, to suppress all of this junk, and natural selection should have weeded out all of this junk over millions of years of so-called evolution, since transcribing this junk or keeping it around is wasteful for energy and resources. So it makes no sense to keep it around, which suggests that it's actually functional. Okay, transcribing a gene, transcribing a portion of the genome, or keeping a portion of the genome active is a very energy intensive process. Okay, every time you're adding a nucleotide to a growing RNA chain, you are consuming a lot of energy. Okay, PAULOGIA. So tell me, why have evolutionary mechanisms not removed so much so-called junk in our genome? The low transcription argument, it doesn't work, and I deal with that extensively in my book here. Okay, so again, it is a transcription factor binding site in the middle of a what? A long non-coding RNA helicase gene. It codes for a functional RNA molecule that is active in the genome. Genome-wide activity is what we find. And this is a direct prediction and expectation from the design diversity model, right? Because we believe in change. And in my latest presentation, I pointed out how evolutionists will oftentimes say things like, well, of course evolution is true, because evolution just means change over time. And we point out as biblical creationists, sure, if by evolution you mean change over time, sure, our cell phones change over time, the way we think changes over time, cars change over time, many things change over time. And biological evolution just means changes in allele frequencies in populations over time. Okay, so nobody's going to disagree with change over time. But what is the direction of that change? The design diversity model would suggest that God front-loaded Adam and Eve, which applies to the created kinds, okay, universally across the created archetypes, with heterozygosity, with design diversity. And through processes like recombination and gene conversion, new chromosomal combinations can arise quickly, since guess what? That DNA diversity is built in from the start. It's the evolutionists that want to explain the vast majority of genetic variation and genetic diversity as being the result of what? Deleterious mutations? Deleterious mutations? Population geneticists understand that the majority of mutations are effectively neutral. That means they're slightly deleterious. Okay, they're slightly degrading to biological organisms. And the fact that they're neutral, not absolutely neutral, effectively neutral, the fact that they're neutral means selection can't see them. And so they spread throughout the populations. And all the arguments that PAULOGIA would look to, like synergistic epistasis, purifying selection, beneficial mutations, whether it be super beneficial mutations, truncation selection, mutation count mechanism, they've all been analyzed. They've all been systematically demolished. As a matter of fact, I have an entire chapter of on that topic in my book here. Okay. So the point is, no, the vast majority of beneficial diversity has to be created diversity, since the type of diversity that deleterious mutations create is like the type of diversity or variation that you get in your brand new car that you park too close to another car when you enter the grocery store and they slam their door against it. Now you got a dent. Okay, that's the type of variation you get from mutations, are the dents, the dings, and the rust marks on your car. That's not beneficial. And you know what? The best so-called beneficial mutations you can point to, if they're not epigenetic, okay, because we have this extra layer of highly complicated information called the epigenome, this amazingly designed control system. If every single gene was turned on at the same time, that would not be good. That would lead to disease. You would die. We need some kind of control mechanism, and that's what the epigenome is. And epigenetic changes are the result of the pre-existing capacity to adapt. Adaptive episodes does not mean that fish evolved into fishermen or bacteria-like organisms evolved into biologists. Okay, so the type of change we see are horizontal changes, not vertical changes that would be required if you're taking pond scum to people. And you want to say, like PAULOGIA, that whales and pine trees are related. Okay, so we're not against change. And again, this brings us back to genome activity, genome function. Design diversity predicts that the vast majority of DNA elements, DNA sequences are functional, and that's exactly what we are seeing. It is the biblical creationists that are making testable predictions, and the chromosome 2 fusion doesn't work. So what they want to say is, again, it's just low-level transcription that we're seeing here in the chromosome 2 fusion area, the so-called chromosome 2 fusion, or it's just not even functional at all. Okay, it doesn't code for a protein. They don't understand. They have such an unsophisticated view of DNA function. They think, it's only functional if you go DNA to RNA to protein. DNA transcribed into RNA translated into protein. No, a lot of the genome codes for functional RNA products, where you have DNA to RNA, and then you get functional RNA products. Okay, that oftentimes are involved with the direct control of the amount of protein products being translated, okay, being produced, because the vast majority of the genome in the non-coding areas are involved in what? Development, involved in gene expression, gene regulation, determining cell types. Okay, it's like science fiction what's going on the molecular level. We have a lot of functional redundancy. We have a lot of these DNA elements that have secondary functions. Not just one function, but secondary functions like protein moonlighting, for example. You have these nuclear DNA proteins that are multifunctional. It's like these multifunctional tools that you have, where you have all these different things attached into one. Okay, many uses in one tool. And that's what we see with these proteins. That's what we see with, for example, third position codon variation, where they're not only involved in information flow, right? They're involved in information flow. They're also acting as, redundant elements. We have some of these elements that are involved in cell optimization. I mean, there's just so much going on in the genome. We have these multiple overlapping codes. A challenge I want for PAULOGIA is to show us how evolutionary mechanisms can evolve, okay, a genome that is multifunctional, that is overlapping and nested with massive amounts of meta information. Show me how that's possible. Listen, we write books that can be read forwards, but we don't write books that can be read both forwards and backwards. DNA can do this. Okay, DNA can be read both forwards and backwards, and every other letter you have another message. You have 3 messages in one. That means the genome is both polyfunctional and polyconstrained. And what that means is if you were to get a deleterious mutation, that deleterious mutation is more likely to disrupt the message, since you have 3, maybe 4 messages in one. Okay, that's going to disrupt the message. It's not going to make it any better. So again, these arguments just don't work. And to say that, well, it's not really functional, it doesn't code for a protein, or it's just low levels. No, that doesn't work. Okay. And let me refute that right here. Tompkins has recently, who's a PhD geneticist, by the way, has recently published compelling evidence that the reputed fusion site, that's what the RFS stands for, is not a fusion site at all, but is a functional component of what? The DDX11L2 gene that we were talking about earlier. He has shown that the reputed fusion site lies within the first intron of this gene. Furthermore, he has shown that the so-called fusion site sequence has the following attributes. So notice this. They want to say, well, it's not really that functional, or it's not even functional. It's just noise. Oh, really? Because it is an active promoter for the transcription of an alternative transcript. It binds at least 12 transcription factors. It initiates RNA transcription, which begins within its own sequence, and it has a chromatin profile that further supports its active promoter status. Again, you don't get highly essential and functional genes by slamming together 2 chromosomes like PAULOGIA here is saying, or the video that he played is saying. He's not even saying it. That's what I mean. These guys, they just parrot arguments. That's why people like Vice Rhino, PAULOGIA, you won't see them in a live debate, because they focus on their scripted videos that they spend a month editing, and they put it out and they think like they've contributed something. Let's see you defend your endogenous retrovirus or chromosome 2 fusion arguments in a live debate with an informed creationist. They won't do it. They won't do it. To be too damaging to all of their fans when they see that they just parrot these arguments and they don't know how to defend. They dodge, they duck, they dip, they dive, and they dodge. The 5 Ds of dodgeball. That's what they do best. And that's why, you can drink 5 to 6 cups of evolutionist tears a day, because that's what we get. That's what we get, is a lot of evolutionist tears. And again, it's the perfect way to start your day. As a matter of fact, it's what I do before every single show. And that's why I have so much energy here. Okay. Tompkins also provides evidence that the DDX11L2 gene produces RNA that helps regulate. Again, in the genome, we have, a gene over here that's helping to regulate a gene that's way over here. I mean, it is amazing what's going on the cellular level. And that goes for all of what the evolutionists used to look to as their so-called best lines of evidence for evolution. ALU sequences, same thing, highly functional. Pseudogenes, necessary to sustain healthy life processes in the cell. ERV sequences, functional in the embryo to the point if we didn't have them, we wouldn't exist. And yet they want to say co-option, but that's simply uninformative gloss. It's storytelling. Okay, cool story, bro. Show us some empirical evidence. Regulate the DDX11L gene family, just has been shown with other functional pseudogenes. Unless all of these many levels of evidence can be refuted, challenge to PAULOGIA, let's see if you can do it. It appears that Tompkins has successfully falsified the hypothesis that the reputed fusion site is a fusion site. And remember, these so-called interstitial or internal telomeric sequences, they're not just found at this area. Even if they're found in more abundance in this area than anywhere else in the genome, it doesn't matter. That's probably why they chose this area, because they had to find some kind of anomaly to push this fairy tale. So they probably found the one chromosome or the one area that comprises the most of these telomeric like sequences, and said, they said, see here, here's evidence of, here's evidence of a past chromosome 2 fusion. And that explains the discrepancy. No, again, it doesn't work. It's still too degenerate, but whatever is there, those sequences that are there, they're performing functional roles. They're involved in gene expression. They're binding to transcription factors, which initiate a gene to begin to be copied into RNA. No, it's not evidence of a past fusion event. Oh, but there's more there than anywhere else. Okay, whether or not that's true, it doesn't matter, because they're still found spread throughout the genome, and in other places in the genome and other chromosomes, they have nothing to do with a fusion event. And if there are more here in this location, that's probably why they chose this location. Okay, you need a little bit of reason to push this fairy tale, but it doesn't work. It doesn't work. Okay. And right here is just a fatal blow. This is just an absolute fatal blow. I predict PAULOGIA has never even read this paper, has never even heard of this paper. Okay, I can't even tell you how many times I've been in debates or open mics, and the evolutionists confidently brought up the chromosome 2 fusion, and I pulled out this paper and I said, how do you explain the fact that there is a lack of this very specific type of DNA, this satellite DNA, around human chromosomes, around the reputed fusion site where it should be if there was a fusion, or a fusion that is correlated with ape to man evolution? Chimpanzee and gorilla chromosomes differ from human chromosomes. Okay, here's my challenge to PAULOGIA. Show me, send it to me. You don't even have to debate me on it. I challenge you. How did human chromosomes lose these large blocks of DNA here? Okay, because again, chimpanzee and gorilla chromosomes differ from human chromosomes by the presence of large blocks of subterminal heterochromatin thought to be composed primarily of arrays of tandem satellite sequence. Show me. Where are these expected sequences around the chromosome 2 fusion, around the chromosome 2? We know they're not there. Okay, this paper admits it. Now they're going to have to say that it was lost over time. Cool story, bro. Show me the empirical evidence. So at best, what do we have? A human specific fusion that happened either immediately post-flood or sometime pre-flood, and therefore it was able to be fixed, since we have two bottlenecks to explain it. They don't have any real plausible or empirical way to explain how every single human has 46 chromosomes due to this fusion. No. So at best, we have a human line that has nothing to do with ape to man evolution fusion, but we don't even have to go there. It's a double whammy. Either way, it doesn't work for them. Either way, it doesn't work for them. You could even, for sake of argument, give it to them. But guess what? Chimpanzee and gorilla chromosomes differ from human chromosomes by the presence of large blocks of subterminal heterochromatin, thought to be composed primarily of arrays of tandem satellite sequence. Not only that, we've discussed at great length, and for sake of time, I'm not going to do it here, the incredible differences in the Y chromosome and the mitochondrial DNA. That's nothing like when you compare humans and chimpanzees. When you consider overall architecture, here's another challenge for PAULOGIA. When you consider overall gene content, size differences, and architecture, the human Y chromosome and the chimpanzee Y chromosome is only about 35% the same. Now, when you don't consider size differences, it's about 70% the same. Either way, there's a massive waiting time problem to explain those differences, especially based on the fact that every single male Y chromosome is nearly identical. Okay, there's only one male Y chromosome, and it can be traced back to one Y chromosomal ancestor just 4,500 years ago. The mutation rate in the Y chromosome is roughly 3 mutations per generation. There's only a few hundred, roughly, mutations max separating any two people in the Y chromosome, how do you explain a rapidly mutating Y chromosome that has incredibly low variation? Here's a challenge to Paulogia that he will dodge, he will duck, he will dip, he will dive, he will dodge, because he has no answer, because there is no answer, because the hypotheses that suggest chimpanzee polygamous relationships, sperm competition, increased rates of gene conversion, I've read them all. I've read these papers. They don't work. They're hypotheses. They're stories. And again, Paulogia, cool story, bro. I want empirical evidence. I don't just want a story for why you believe whales and pine trees are related or chimpanzees and humans are related. Okay, based on a chromosome 2 fusion that doesn't exist? Since there's no evidence for this so-called second centromere, and where they desperately try and say it is, where it's not there clearly, because it lacks the signatures of it being a second deactivated chromosome, is also overlapped by a highly functional gene. The so-called internal telomeric sequences are found all throughout the genome, and they're functional in gene expression, and among probably other things too, since we understand a lot of the genome is multifunctional. And the so-called fusion site itself is degenerate, but it's overlapped by a highly functional gene, the DDX11L2. That's it. It's done. And worst of all for them, what do we have here? A lack of this type of satellite DNA around human chromosomes that should be there for related. Okay. But again, we can look to other lines of evidence to show that humans and chimpanzees aren't related anyways. So the chromosome 2 fusion being indirect evidence, even if there was one, is not evidence for ape to man evolution. And you know what? Paulogia admitted in this video that this is what did it for him, because he didn't look at the data thoroughly. He didn't look at the data comprehensively. He didn't look at the data with an open mind. Okay, he fits 2 Peter 3, those that are willingly ignorant, those that scoff at the special creation event. But guess what? Special creation is true. Separate ancestry is true. Ken Miller said if there was no fusion, there's no evolution. Guess what? There's no evolution because there's no fusion. But again, another challenge to Paulogia is explain to me the incredible Y chromosomal dissimilarity between humans and chimpanzees, because the only way you can explain a human Y chromosome that is incredibly fast in terms of its mutation rate and has incredibly low variation is through separate ancestry and young Earth creation. Because guess what? It makes sense. If our last Y chromosomal ancestor is just 4,500 years ago, then sure, you can have a Y chromosome, which is uniparentally inherited DNA, non-recombining, therefore it's less messy. Should have been more stable, but yet it's only 35% the same between humans and chimpanzees. I want to see Paulogia try and address this. He won't be able to. Okay. And they want to say, well, the human Y chromosome mutates fast. That's why it's different. Or sperm competition in chimpanzees, or higher rates of gene conversion. Wait a minute. But there's low variation. So it's mutating fast, but it could not have been mutating fast for very long, because mutations add diversity, since mutations are adding something that was not previously there. So if the Y chromosome, this uniparentally inherited DNA compartment, goes back a couple 100,000 years or even millions of years, then we should have high levels of variation in the Y chromosome, and we should have highly divergent Y chromosomal groups. But we don't. We don't find that. None of this is consistent with the evolutionary model, okay? And the evolutionists fail to answer these challenges. They have guesses, they have stories, untested hypotheses, but that's not going to work, okay? We're interested in testable predictions. We're interested in empirical science, and we're not getting that from these critics, unfortunately. So no, there was no chromosome 2 fusion. And even for sake of argument, if there was, this Ventura paper and the fact that there are these significant differences in chimpanzee, gorilla, and human chromosomes tells us that it was a fusion directly in the human line that a biblical creation model can explain anyways. But we don't even need to go that far, since genomic data has refuted this idea of a fusion that for some reason Paulogia got completely sucked into for whatever reason. You know, I don't know what's so attractive about believing that, as P.Z. Myers says, you know, you're still a fish, but sounds rather ridiculous to me. And it's most importantly, it's not corroborated by the scientific data. It's pseudoscience. However, both the alleged site of fusion and the so-called cryptic centromere of human chromosome 2, this is what I was just talking about, are situated inside active genes. So notice that the so-called cryptic centromere of the chromosome 2 fusion and the fusion site itself are both inside active genes. Both of them, negating the idea of a fusion. And again, the so-called fusion site, it's red in the reverse complement. It is a transcription factor binding site in the middle of this DDX11L2 gene, which is a long non-coding RNA helicase gene. It codes for a functional RNA molecule and it's active in the genome. There's no fusion. Refute my points, answer my challenges, quit dodging. Okay, just repeating the same unimpressive, worthless talking points is not going to convince informed biblical creationists that actually study this stuff. Okay, they're just trying to convince the ignorant, and what it is it's confirmation bias for their audience. Oh wow, ERVs, yeah, I guess creationists don't know how to answer that. Oh man, chromosome 2 fusion, yeah, creationists, I guess they've never heard of that one. No, it's all been dealt with. It's all been demolished. Oh, I tell you. Not only are the alleged genomic fossils of fusion representative of functional intragenic sequence, but they're also both highly degenerate versions of their supposed evolutionary beginnings. That's why it makes sense that we're just dealing with a highly functional gene, and these so-called internal telomeric sequences are involved in the function and activity of that gene. That's it. They want to make stories for why it's degenerate as well, because it's been a lot of time since the split and since the fusion. And so they've had time to degenerate since the original pristine signatures of the fusion, essentially. Okay, no, we don't need to go that far. We have a highly functional gene and we have DNA elements or components of that gene that help with the activity and function of that gene. That's it. End of story. That makes sense. We don't need to go into any far-fetched storytelling. It's been falsified. It's been refuted. It's a failed prediction. It doesn't work. I'm sorry, Paulogia. Find some better evidence for why you and a strawberry are related. Find some better evidence. I understand the chromosome 2 fusion is specific to ape to man evolution and why you're related to, the chimpanzee over at the local zoo. Okay, no, it doesn't work. I like to stick to as close as home as possible. Okay, I don't need to go as far on the family tree as, whales and pine trees. Let's stay as close to home as possible. And the genomic data, the best way to answer this question of ancestry, refutes the idea that humans and chimpanzees are related. The mitochondrial DNA demonstrates this. The lack of there being a chromosome 2 fusion demonstrates this. DNA function demonstrates this. Y chromosomal dissimilarity demonstrate this. Linkage blocks. Here's another challenge for Paulogia. Why are there still so many large intact chromosomal text strings or linkage blocks in the human genome if we go back 200,000 years to Africa and before that millions of years to Australopithecine-like ancestors? That means that's generation after generation after generation of recombination and gene conversion, which scrambles up these DNA differences. Okay, we shouldn't have these massive blocks, linkage blocks, where it looks like there's been no scrambling, no recombination at all. That makes sense if the genome is young. But if the genome is old, these genomes should have been scrambled into nothingness. How do you explain the low genetic variation? Makes sense. God creates two people, Adam and Eve. That automatically restricts genetic variation, levels of genetic diversity. That's what we see today. Humans are nearly identical in the Y chromosome, in the mitochondrial DNA and autosomal DNA. Why is that? The evolutionists want to look to some post hoc, ad hoc story in the out of Africa scenario where there's this massive continent-wide near extinction event that apparently reduced levels of heterozygosity and increased levels of homozygosity. But guess what? In order to do that, since you have millions of years of what? Australopithecine-like ancestors eventually evolving into habilis, and then habilis into erectus, and then erectus, lives on this planet for 1 million plus years, and then eventually, you have two out of Africa events where you have erectus leaves Africa apparently, and then evolves independently into other human forms like Neanderthalensis, into Heidelbergensis, Floresiensis, Naledi, and then eventually in Africa, erectus evolves into Homo sapiens, and eventually Homo sapiens leaves, and lo and behold, what do we have? Neanderthals, we have Naledi, Floresiensis on other continents. which wasn't expected. But the point is, we should have multiple mitochondrial and Y chromosomal lines if this is the case. We should have way higher levels of genetic diversity, and linkage blocks in the human genome should be much more scrambled. None of this fits, none of this works, and the evolutionists lack any sophisticated engagement on these issues. They just want to make videos like PAULOGIA here, where they repeat already debunked talking points. We are past this point. Let's have a sophisticated and technical discussion on these major challenges to your evolutionary story. Address these challenges. I've given you several. The latest challenge is the linkage block challenge. Okay, tell me how that is possible, because all of this data is perfectly in line with the biblical creation model. This is what we would expect. One Y chromosomal line, one mitochondrial DNA line, low genetic variation, these large intact linkage blocks, these chromosomal text strings that have no evidence of ever being scrambled or subject to recombination. Well, that makes sense if we've only had 4,500 to 6,000 years of mutations, recombination, and gene conversion. That makes sense. Doesn't make sense with evolution, though. There should be high levels of genetic diversity, much more scrambling in the genome. There should be way better evidence for what? Junk DNA reflecting this millions of years worth of evolutionary history and descent with modification. We don't find this. We don't find this, PAULOGIA. Find me some better and more sophisticated arguments and start by answering these challenges, which I know and I predict, because you're all about testable predictions, but your testable predictions have been falsified and fail. Okay? I predict you won't address these because you can't. Given that these data strongly refute an evolutionary fusion scenario, it behooves creationists to propose an alternative model for the functional nature of telomere-like sequences scattered around the internal regions of human chromosomes. Towards the end, new data based on ENCODE, the ENCODE project data sets, is provided that further, notice this, elucidates the regulatory role of interstitial, that's these internal telomeric sequences, genome-wide, particularly with respect to their transcription factor binding domain properties and transcription start site associations. We've talked about this all throughout. The most important finding of this current research was the confirmation of the possible role of internal or interstitial telomeric sites or sequences. Sites in gene regulation as depicted by the high number of ITS, again, these internal telomeric sequences associated with enhancer transcription start site associated regions and transcription factor binding strongly suggests that many of these sites are involved in gene regulation, especially in regard to their role in transcription factor binding and transcription start site activity. Guys, this is it. It's done. There was no fusion. Okay, it's been debunked. It's been debunked. All their rescue devices, debunking the debunkers. I highly recommend reading that paper. Anything PAULOGIA could put forth, it's already been debunked. But what he won't provide is testable predictions. Guarantee he won't provide testable predictions. So I also wanted to touch on Neanderthals, but I'm going to make a series of this. Just absolutely dismantling all of their so-called best lines of evidence, which again, of course, I do here in great detail. So this is all still going to be as much as I can fit in within an hour or two broadcast. So please, guys, you're not going to regret it. Beautiful book. Benjamin did a fantastic job on the design. Touches on all the best arguments for separate ancestry and against universal common ancestry. It will be linked in the description box and pinned in the comment section. It is at an all-time low price because I want people to be able to pick it up, since it is so important, as it is 300 pages worth of information that just absolutely dismantles common descent and confirms biblical creation and separate ancestry. So now's your chance to pick it up at printing cost for those that want to buy it in bulk and pass it around to friends, family, church members. Now is the time. You are not going to want to regret it. So in the book, I address arguments like this one, chromosome 2 fusion. You'll find a lot of these same arguments I went over here. Of course, why the out of Africa theory is the out of Africa myth, and why the out of Middle East model is the most parsimonious model in light of the data. I got a whole massive chapter on Neanderthals explaining exactly why Neanderthal genetics are the way they are. Because Neanderthal genetics, especially in the mitochondrial DNA, they're a lot different when compared to us. But within themselves, they're very uniform. There's very low variation. And I have some novel answers that you are not going to want to miss out on. And they are provided in that chapter on Neanderthal, and it just wipes the floor with these arguments put forth by people like Dr. Dan Stern-Cardinal. Okay, this chapter sufficiently answers this challenge or this question that asks, why are Neanderthals so different to modern humans today? And I think you'll be blown away. I think you'll be blown away. But what I'm going to do sometime in the next week is, since I mostly focus on the chromosome 2 fusion in this episode, in the next episode, I want to go over Neanderthals, and I want to provide just a sneak peek into the overall answers provided to these evolutionary challenges in the chapter specifically on Neanderthals. So with that being said, guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. It's a great time to be a biblical creationist. If you're not yet subscribed, please hit that subscribe button. Share around this content, because the truth is so important. But not only that, critical thinking is so important. And that's why we host so many debates, so many discussions. And that's why we host these conferences. Notice we didn't do a behind closed doors conference. No, we had a conference that was 5 days, 10 shows. We had audience question and answer periods for the most time during every show. We asked the tough questions. After the presentations, we had a sophisticated discussion. You know, we're here to discuss these questions of origins, because there's no more important question than the question of origins. This is about where we're going to spend eternity. This is about where we came from. This is about whether or not evolution's true, creation's true. Can we trust the Bible? The Bible claims to be the history book of the universe. And the Bible makes some very specific claims on human origins and the origins of this earth and this universe. And those claims can be directly tested to the scientific data. And it just so turns out that the scientific data is perfectly consistent with the account of origins in Genesis. And I cover all of those lines of evidence here in Special Creation. So make sure to pick up your copy today. And you can either get a full color version, you can get a black and white version, and hopefully we're going to come out with a hardcover version soon as well. So thanks for sticking with me. I hope this was comprehensive enough on the chromosome 2 fusion. I know it's a technical topic, but it's an important one. And it's just as important as the endogenous retrovirus topic, which is why I wrote an entire 200-page book on it, because the evolutionists love looking to endogenous retroviruses. They love looking to chromosome 2 fusion. They love looking to Neanderthal genetics. And that's why I like to spend my time on their so-called best lines of evidence, just to show them that their so-called best lines of evidence for why, you know, they and a strawberry are related through common ancestry turns out to be some of the best evidence for special creation. God bless all.